Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be looking at Rosefifold.
Oh, yeah.
It's a revolutionary new method in protein science.
It's really cool.
Yeah, and it can predict the 3D structure of a protein just from its building blocks.
Yeah, just from its amino acid sequence.
That's crazy. I'm so excited to learn about this.
Me too.
Okay, but before we get too deep into this, for our listeners who maybe aren't protein experts,
Right.
why is predicting protein structure so important? What's the big deal?
Well, proteins are super important. They do so much in our cells. They're involved in basically every process that keeps us alive.
Right, they're like the little machines.
Exactly. They're like the little machines that make everything work.
Okay, so they transport molecules, they catalyze reactions.
Yeah, they do all sorts of stuff. They even provide structural support.
Wow.
And the key thing is their function is tied to their shape. So if the shape is wrong, it's not going to work.
So it's like a key fitting into a lock.
Yeah, exactly. If the key is the wrong shape, it's not going to unlock the door.
So knowing the shape of a protein is like having the instruction manual for how it works.
Precisely. And once we know how it works, we can start to understand how it goes wrong in diseases and how we might be able to fix it.
Oh, that's cool. So this is important for drug discovery and disease research.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does Rosefifold pull off this seemingly impossible feat? How does it predict these protein structures?
Well, it's powered by AI.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a neural network. It's like a super-powered brain that can analyze tons of data and learn from it.
And in this case, the data is other protein structures.
Exactly, a massive library of known protein structures.
So Rosefifold has basically been trained on all this data, and it's learned to recognize the patterns.
Yeah, the patterns and relationships between the protein's amino acid sequence and its 3D shape.
It's like showing a computer a million origami cranes
Uh-huh.
and then letting it figure out the folding patterns.
Exactly, a great analogy.
That's crazy.
And what's amazing is that Rosefifold can now take a brand new protein sequence that it's never seen before and predict its structure with remarkable accuracy.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Okay, so how does Rosefifold stack up against other protein structure prediction methods?
Well, it's a game changer because it's super accurate.
Yeah.
And it's also really fast and efficient.
Oh, wow. So it's like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. In a recent competition called CASP14, where different methods went head-to-head to predict protein structures, Rosefifold did incredibly well.
Really?
Yeah, it even outperformed some of the most well-established methods out there.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay, so it sounds like Rosefifold is a real champion in the protein prediction arena.
For sure.
But what about its real-world impact? Has it already led to any scientific breakthroughs?
Definitely, it's already helping scientists solve mysteries in lots of fields.
What kind of mysteries?
Well, for example, it's been super helpful in determining the structure of proteins that were previously impossible to crack using traditional experimental techniques.
So Rosefifold is like a new tool in the scientist's toolbox.
Exactly, it lets them see things they couldn't see before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's not just about solving individual structures, it's also helping us understand how proteins interact with each other, forming these complex molecular machines.
Oh, wow. So we can see how these proteins work together to make everything happen.
Exactly.
This is so exciting. I want to dive deeper into some specific examples of how Rosefifold is being used.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so let's get into some specific examples of how Rosefifold is actually being used.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's helping scientists figure out structures that were impossible to solve before.
Right.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so one area where Rosefifold is really making a difference is in X-ray crystallography.
Okay.
So this technique, it lets scientists determine the structure of proteins by analyzing how X-rays diffract off a crystallized protein.
Okay, so they crystallize the protein and then shine X-rays on it.
Yeah, it's kind of like shining a flashlight on a crystal and then looking at the patterns of light that come out.
Okay, I vaguely remember learning about this in school.
Yeah.
But where does Rosefifold come in? How does it help?
Well, sometimes the data from these X-ray experiments is really complex.
What about?
It can be hard to interpret, and so scientists need accurate models to help guide them in piecing together the puzzle.
Okay.
And that's where Rosefifold is so helpful. It can generate these models that are precise enough to make sense of the data.
So it's like a code breaker.
Yeah, exactly.
It helps decipher those hidden messages in the X-ray data.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just limited to X-ray crystallography.
Oh, really?
It's also used in cryo-electron microscopy, which is another powerful imaging technique.
Okay.
It lets us visualize these proteins in amazing detail.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in some cases, Rose-Dayfold has actually provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Like, it's helped scientists interpret the cryo-EM data.
Okay.
And determine structures that we just couldn't figure out before.
So we can see these tiny little molecular machines.
We can. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But seeing the structure is one thing, right? Understanding what it actually does is another.
You're exactly right.
So can Rosetta Fold help with that too?
Yeah, so structure and function are really closely linked when it comes to proteins. And Rosetta Fold can give us insight into protein function, even for proteins that we haven't experimentally determined the structure for.
Wow, so it can predict the function just from the structure?
Yeah, basically.
That's pretty crazy. How does it do that?
Well, Rosetta Fold lets scientists see all these intricate details about a protein's shape, like the folds and pockets and active sites.
Okay.
And these features can give us clues about how the protein interacts with other molecules and ultimately what its job is in the cell.
So it's like looking at the shape of a tool and being able to tell what it's used for.
Exactly. It's like that.
Can you give us some concrete examples of how Rosetta Fold is being used to figure out protein function?
Sure. So let's take the protein TNGO2, for example. So mutations in this protein can cause metabolic disorders, but we weren't really sure what its exact role was.
Okay.
The model from Rosetta Fold actually predicted that TNGO2 acts like a pair of molecular scissors.
Molecular scissors? What?
I know, right? So cool.
Awesome.
It breaks down certain molecules in the cell, and this insight could lead to new therapies for treating those disorders.
So we're getting a glimpse into the inner workings of our cells.
We're understanding how these tiny little machines are keeping us alive.
That's amazing. Any other examples?
Yeah, definitely. So another great example is the protein ADM33,
Okay.
which is involved in all sorts of diseases like asthma and cancer.
Wow.
And Rosetta Fold provided the first structural model of its prodomain, which is this region that controls the protein's activity.
Okay.
This is really important for drug development because it means scientists can potentially design drugs that target this specific region and change how ADM33 works.
So Rosetta Fold isn't just this theoretical tool.
Right.
It's actually solving real-world problems.
It is. It's pretty amazing.
That's awesome. Are there any other ways it's being used to advance our understanding of proteins?
Yeah, so one of the coolest things about Rosetta Fold is that it can actually predict the structure of protein complexes.
Protein complexes.
Yeah, so you see proteins rarely work alone. They often interact with each other.
Okay.
They form these partnerships that carry out really important functions.
Oh, so they team up.
Yeah, they team up, and these complexes can be huge and super complicated.
I bet.
And predicting their structures has always been a really difficult task.
Yeah, I can only imagine trying to figure out how all those pieces fit together.
It's like a giant 3D jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
But Rosetta Fold has changed everything. Instead of modeling the proteins individually and then trying to piece them together, Rosetta Fold can predict the structure of the whole complex just from the amino acid sequences of the individual proteins.
So it considers all the proteins at the same time.
Yeah, it's like choreographing a dance.
Okay.
You know, where you're considering the movements of all the dancers together.
Right.
Rather than trying to piece together individual steps afterwards.
That's such a cool way to think about it.
I know, right? It's so elegant.
So how well does Rosetta Fold actually do at predicting these complex structures?
It does a really good job. It's incredibly accurate.
Wow.
It's been able to predict the structures of simpler complexes with like 2 or 3 proteins.
Okay.
But it's also tackled much more complicated ones like the human IL-12 or IL-12 system.
What's that?
It's this complex that plays a super important role in our immune system.
Okay.
And Rosetta Fold was able to predict not only its overall structure,
Okay.
but also like the tiny details about how each individual protein interacts within that complex.
So we're seeing how all the pieces fit together at an atomic level.
Exactly. And this knowledge is super valuable for developing new drugs for immune-related diseases.
It's like we have a whole new level of understanding about how proteins work together to keep us alive.
I know, it's so cool.
This is all so fascinating. I mean, it's crazy that we can now predict the structures of these protein complexes. It feels like we're entering a whole new era.
It really is. Like Rosetta Fold's not just helping us understand existing proteins, but it's also opening up these possibilities for designing new ones.
Wait, designing new proteins like from scratch?
Yeah, like completely new proteins with functions that we choose.
That sounds like sci-fi.
I know, right? It's pretty wild, but it's becoming a reality.
Okay.
Remember how we were talking about Rosetta Fold being able to model protein complexes and understand those interactions?
Yeah.
That's crucial for protein design because when you're designing a new protein, you often want it to interact with other molecules in a very specific way.
Oh, so it's like we have a blueprint for building molecular machines.
Exactly. But instead of gears and wires, we're using amino acids.
So we can use Rosetta Fold to guide us in arranging the amino acids in just the right way to create a protein that does what we want.
Yeah, it's like being a molecular architect.
Okay, now you're just blowing my mind. What kind of things could we do with these designer proteins? What are we talking about here?
The possibilities are endless. I mean, imagine designing proteins that can break down plastic waste,
Wow.
help us clean up the oceans and landfills, or proteins that can be used as catalysts in industrial processes to make manufacturing more efficient and sustainable.
So we could make things in a more environmentally friendly way.
Exactly. We could even design proteins that can target and destroy cancer cells, like with pinpoint accuracy.
Yeah, that would be a game changer.
It would revolutionize how we treat cancer.
These are some seriously ambitious goals. How far away are we from actually being able to do this?
Well, protein design is still a pretty young field,
Okay.
but it's advancing so quickly thanks to tools like Rosetta Fold. We're already seeing some really promising results in labs where scientists are designing proteins with brand new functions.
So it's not just theory anymore.
No, it's becoming reality, but of course there are still challenges to overcome.
Right.
But the progress is really exciting.
This is so inspiring. It feels like we're on the verge of a revolution,
I think so too, a biotech revolution.
powered by protein design.
It's amazing to think that this is all built on decades of scientific research, culminating in breakthroughs like Rosetta Fold. It shows what we can achieve with curiosity and ingenuity.
This deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from the basics of protein structure to the crazy possibilities of protein design. What are your final thoughts for our listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this?
I would just say, stay curious. The world of science is full of wonder, and there's so much more to discover. And when it comes to proteins, we're just getting started.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
So keep asking questions, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to make the next big breakthrough in protein science.
I love that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of proteins.
It was my pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.